Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we're delighted to be hosting Elie Mystal, who's here to talk about his new book, Bad Law, 10 Popular Laws That Are Ruining America. Formerly a lawyer, Elie is now a columnist and justice correspondent for the Nation, as I'm sure many of you are aware. He's also a fellow at the Type Media Center. His previous book 3 years ago was Allow Me To Retort, a black guy's guide to the Constitution. In his new book, Elie switches from the Constitution to the work of Congress and state legislatures, and as he often does, packs his arguments with both humor and deep analysis. He maintains that our country's laws in such areas as immigration, abortion, religious freedom, and voting rights don't reflect the will of most Americans and are actually making life worse rather than better. They have, he says, perpetrated bigotry, discrimination, inequality, and injustice. And he says we'd just be better off abolishing them and starting over. Now, Elie singles out 10 pieces of legislation and 1 constitutional amendment that he asserts cause massive social and political harm. In fact, he says if it were up to him, every law passed before the Voting Rights Act of 1965 would be treated as presumptively unconstitutional. Because in his view, before the Voting Rights Act, which he considers the most important single piece of legislation ever passed in American history, before that, he says, the United States functioned as an apartheid state. Now, some of his examples are familiar and straightforward, like immigration laws that impose criminal penalties for illegal reentry, restrictions on voter registration, or rules that hold criminals liable for deaths arising from attempted felonies. Other examples that Elie cites are maybe a little less intuitive. For instance, he castigates the 1978 Airline Deregulation Act, which he notes isn't as important as voter suppression or racist treatment of immigrants, but it's a pet peeve of his. He blames it for promoting the rise of neoliberalism, calling it, quote, the moment when the Democratic Party turned its back on the New Deal and the Great Society and instead adopted free market language pushed by capitalist thugs. Don't get him going on the Airline Deregulation Act. Now, Elie concludes his book by arguing that what's required before other kinds of reform is to make American democracy more representative. To do this, he suggests changing how congressional seats are apportioned, specifically by mandating that each congressperson represent as few people as Wyoming's population, which is about 580,000. And if you did that, it would add more representatives to populous states like California, New York, and Elie says go a long way toward restoring basic representative democracy in this country. So, a lot to discuss with Elie this evening, and guiding the discussion will be Mark Joseph Stern, a senior writer covering courts and the law for Slate. He also is the author of American Justice 2019, The Roberts Court Arrives. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Elie Mystal and Mark Stern.
Thank you. Are we good?
I'm just gonna mic you up real quick. Is it right if I stick it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And you still want me to use the hand mic, right?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
This is just for C-SPAN purposes.
Sure. Okay.
Is that comfortable?
It is very, yes, it's perfect. Thank you.
You know, when I'm on TV, they put the microphone upside down because I'm too loud.
Okay, I think we can begin. No? No problem. Okay. Hello, what an honor it is to be here with all of you, with one of the greats of legal journalism today, Elie Mystal. Can we give it up for him one more time? Elie is a great friend of mine, a great mind, someone to bounce ideas off of, and we evidently also have the same views of fashion. I'm realizing now. We can say we dressed in the book's color scheme, right?
Twinsies.
Yes. I loved this book, and I'm so excited that all of you get a chance to read it now. I also get to brag that I got a little bit of insight into the writing process as Elie was going through, thinking about the terrible, terrible laws that we need to repeal. And as I will discuss, there are a couple that I really didn't think you were going to put in there because they're so weird and wonky, and you snuck them in. How did you trick your editor into... That's not my first question, actually.
I have an answer.
What's your answer? Tell
Dick
me.
jokes. Really. You make a funny, and then the editor's like, oh my God, it's hilarious, and they don't even notice.
There are many, many dick jokes, some at your own expense, which is very brave. I also think this book should be in every high school in America, except for the ones that will surely ban it in the coming weeks, and should be at least required reading for college freshmen. And we can get to all of that. But before we do, I did have sort of like an introductory question about what we've already led into, which is you have 10 laws here, 10 statutes, and then you smuggled in one constitutional amendment because you couldn't just leave the Second Amendment hanging there. You had to revisit it. There are way more than 10 terrible laws in the US Code. How did you narrow it down to these 10? What were the criteria you used when you decided you had to get it to just 10? Like, how did you whittle it to this list?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much, Mark, for doing this. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting. Thank you for everybody for coming, and hopefully you will enjoy the book, or at least the dick jokes. So Mark's question is about scoping, and any author will tell you scoping is one of the hardest parts of any book project. For me, again, there are lots of laws. I have not read them all. And I wasn't kind of concerned with, like, in Alabama, you can't tie your alligator to the fire hydrant, which is true, you can't, for somewhat obvious reasons. That wouldn't even be a bad law. It's just common sense, duh. So my main idea for scoping this book was to think about laws that we could just repeal, right? There are tons of laws that I think are terrible, but I might argue need to be reformed, need to be updated, need to have a new coat of paint for the modern age. One of the laws that I kind of mention in the book but don't highlight in the book is the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, right? Like I think the Anti-Drug Abuse Act is one of the worst laws in the country, but I'm not gonna say we should have no drug laws, right? I don't work for the Sackler family. I'm not trying to, right? And I'm not Nino Brown. So like, there's some idea that like we need some drug laws, just not the ones we have. The laws that I tried to focus on were the ones that we could just do without. Like we just literally don't need. We could get rid of them today and the world would be better tomorrow, right? So I kind of started with the alpha list of like all the laws that I think we could just get rid of. And then I kind of tweaked it for like, well, what actually pisses me off the most? Like, what am I, what's actually, the plane one that you talked about. I'm like sitting on a plane. I'm like, I hate this. And there's a reason why I hate this. And I'm going to write it down, right? It's the laws that people interact with most, that I see most on the news, hurting people, bringing misogyny and bigotry into our system. And I'm like, well, those are the ones that I'm going to focus on repealing. And so that's how I kind of scoped and whittled the book down.
It also seems to me that you thought very carefully about the invisible forces that are making our country miserable and angry and unequal and bigoted, and tried to sort of trace that back to statutory enactments rather than vague sort of causes like, social media or the internet or whatever. You wanted to see, take the airline example, why flying sucks. Everyone agrees it does, but your argument is here is the law that made it thus.
Right. So my first book was about the Constitution and how the Constitution has been, I argue, poorly interpreted by predominantly white male conservatives, right? For this book, I really wanted to look at legislature. I really wanted to look at statutes and laws, but look at laws that were functioning as intended. right? The Constitution, I can argue, could be good, isn't good, right? These laws that I write about in this book, they're doing exactly what they were set out to do. And one of the things that I do throughout the book is I don't ask people to just take my word for it. I try to bring people back to when these laws were passed and ask people to look at what the people who passed them, what the people who wrote them actually said they wanted the law to do. And in many cases, they were pretty straight up with like, we hate the people that we're putting the law against, right? Like they were doing it because they hated people. They were doing it for the racism. They were doing it for the sexism. And they said so, just like today, where Trump does not hide the ball on what he's doing. That has happened multiple times in our past where whether Congress or the president did not hide the ball about the pain and cruelty they were trying to cause. And I just put it in the book. I'm like, this is what they said. So, and it's working. They won. It's doing exactly what they wanted it to do. Maybe we could be rid of it.
And I guess for non-lawyers, it's such an important point to spell out because we constantly encounter in our work these laws that were well-intentioned, that had noble aims that went catastrophically wrong. But this book is not full of those. This book is about the laws that racist and sexist and very evil people put on the books, saddled us with as a nation, that we should just get rid of.
Yes.
And so I have to say, before I get into some of these laws, just one more big picture question. I mean, I love the way that you are thinking so broadly about this. I love the way that you're coming at this by saying, let's just get rid of it, wholesale repeal. Some are saying that this book is something of a Project 2029. Some are saying that this book is the kind of blueprint that progressives need to take on if they want to do big, sweeping, ambitious solutions to the problems that we face today. How do you respond?
Yes. Yes, that was the goal, right? Look, when Republicans come into office, they come into office with a sledgehammer. They come into office to break things. And they usually succeed in taking from me, probably a lot of you too, but taking from me the things that I hold most dear. They smash my country. When Democrats come into office, they come in with super glue. They come in with duct tape. They come in, okay, we're just gonna restore this institute and put this back together and then nail that, and everything's fine and we're gonna protect. And so I thought about writing the kind of what I would say classic 5 constitutional amendments that we totally need to make things super awesome and cool. 10 laws that should be passed by the next. I was like, no. What if we smashed something? What if we took from them some of the racism and misogyny that they have tried to do? What if we smashed their stuff? And that's why I kind of focused it on not this kind of pie in the sky, hopeful, let's pass some of these things. Let's smash some things first. Let's break some of these shackles that are holding us back before we can move forward, because that is what the Republicans do. Right? So just on the Project 2029 thing, you got to remember, Republicans didn't start writing Project 2025 after Joe Biden's first debate. And they were like, oh, we got him now, boys. No, right? They started writing that in 2021 when they had no power and had just attacked the Capitol and lost. Republicans started writing Project 2025 when they had no political power and no obvious way to get it back. And yet they made themselves ready just in case they could, and now we are seeing the destruction that has wrought. So when I'm writing this book before Joe Biden's first debate, under no real illusions about how, I was obviously hopeful, but I understood what could happen at the end of the election, by which point my book was already going to be locked. I was like, no, it's going to be fine either way, because either we win, and I can sell this book from Jamaica because I'll be happy, right? Or we don't, and then this starts the process and the project of trying to rebuild our power. I did not want to write another book that was basically Orange Man very bad. He is very bad, but people know he's very bad. They've baked that into the system. This man spent the last week of his campaign driving around in a garbage truck. And a majority of Americans are just like, I like garbage, more garbage, please. They don't care. They don't care that he's racist. They don't care that he's sexist. They don't care that he sucks. And if we're going to, as Democrats and as progressives, get more people to our side, we've got to offer them something more than Orange Man bad. We have to offer them, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to make things better. And these 10 things just to start, just my personal kind of pet peeve start in some ways. But I promise you, if we did these 10 things, the world would be better for people the next day. And this is something that you can literally run on. We're going to take this away. We're going to smash this. We're going to fix that. So that's how I kind of got there.
Well, okay, just please. Yes, absolutely. I love the spirit. I know a lot of people here love the spirit. I just have one follow-up, which is that, you know, you and I, we do spend a lot of time in courtrooms around sort of like, you know, dusty, slow progress being made inch by inch. We talk to litigators who say we have to take things slow. We talk to legislators who say, you don't understand, we have to build on incrementalism, bill by bill. We talk to a lot of people who are progressive, but whose main mode is caution and cautious progress, whether it's through the courts or through the democratic process. And I think there are some people who would hear what you just said and say, no, the job of American progressives is to take the super glue and patch things together, because if we aren't doing it, nobody else will. So how would you respond to the argument that if the left is breaking things in response to the right breaking things, that everything will wind up broken and nothing will be fixed?
Yeah, how's that working out for us? Right? How did placard gate work out for us? Did the placards that we waved at the State of the Union, did that really stop the Trump momentum, right? No, I obviously don't. I don't abide by the theory that the only thing progressives can do is try to be on the defensive and on the protective. We have to get out there and on the front foot. But the other thing, I think the bigger 30,000-foot question here is that as I have been traveling around the country for this book tour, as I do my work, I see a lot of liberals who are angry, a lot of liberals who have energy, a lot of liberals who are willing to fight, and that's great. I don't see a lot of liberals who are willing to die. And my read on fascism is that it never stops until people are willing to die to stop them. You gotta, it's not enough to be willing to go punch these people in the face. Anybody can punch a person in the face. Anybody can go blow up a tank, right? It's the people who lay down in front of the tanks. It's the people who lay down in front of the onslaught that makes this stop, that slows their progress. And we are not there yet. We are not, I'm not there yet. I've got 2 kids. I would like to see them grow up, right? But I'm getting there. And I think that is part of my radicalization with this Trump regime, realizing that this might not be the kind of fight that you can win with strength of words, right? Yeah. And it's certainly not gonna be the kind of fight you can win with strength of rocks, because they got more of them, right? This is the kind of fight that you look at John Lewis on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, like this is the kind of fight where you win by putting yourself in danger and saying, come at me, bro. And so to the progressives who are just like, who are more like, oh, we have to build slowly, we have to work for incremental change, I kind of say to them, like, I don't think you've fully internalized what we're fighting against, right? And I have tried to internally understand what the fight is. I've tried to give people some ideas, some ways to reconstitute and rethink about the fight that we're in, because this is the kind of fight that we can win, but it's going to take a lot more than a one-off protest or one election or one primary season. It's going to take a lot more than that to beat back what Trump and his MAGA people have unleashed.
Wow.
Womp womp.
No, I mean, I think that's great. The only thing I'll say is I wish that I were hearing that from the Senate Minority Leader instead of from you. You know?
Yeah, I mean, Mark and I have been in these rooms, like you go into certain rooms with certain people, certain geriatric people, and you realize, right? I've been saying, like, I don't trust a person who's never been fired from their job. Right? Because at some level, like, being fired from a job shows that at some point you were like, I will not do that, sir. Like, there is something that you have offered me money to do that I have decided that you cannot offer me. Like, that's something, right? When you go into some of these rooms, you realize that the people in these rooms have spent their entire lives trying to get in those rooms, and they ain't about to leave, right? They ain't about to get fired. They will do whatever they can to stay in their job. And it's like, if all you've got is trying to stay in your job, you are not designed for this moment. You are not designed to lead in this moment. We need people who are not desperate to hang on to their jobs. And you see that here and there within the party. You see that here and there from without the party. You don't see that from the people running the party, because the people running the party are still fundamentally concerned about keeping their jobs. So the only way you change them is that you make them understand you might lose your job. And so that's why, and we'll talk about this later, I'm sure, but like that's why I've been trying to get people focused. Look, the 2026 primary is one of the most important primaries for the Democratic Party in my lifetime, right? I'm not saying that we're going to have a free and fair 2026 general election. I don't know that we will, but we're going to have a free and fair Democratic primary. And somebody's got to lose, right? Like some of these establishment people, some of these people who have not shown the requisite fight and fire in this moment, they gots to go. They've got to feel that. The Tea Party announced itself to the world, not by beating a Democrat. The Tea Party announced itself to the world by beating a Republican in a primary in Virginia, Eric Cantor, a young, up-and-coming leadership Republican, and the Tea Party took his ass out. They lost the seat. They lost the seat in the general because they put up a crazy person in a bluing district in a bluing state, and they lost the seat, but they took his ass out, and then every Republican after was just like, oh, we got to look at the Tea Party. We got to make sure that we're good with the Tea Party because the Tea Party took scalps. 2026, we got to take some people out. And that's going to, if we do that, all of these people in these rooms that are desperate to keep their jobs, that's when they'll start saying, hey, maybe we have to show some more fight. Maybe we have to join Cory Booker in his 25-hour marathon, right? Do you think Cory Booker's worried about a primary challenge right now? I bet he's not, right? Like that's the kind of focus that we have to have in 2026.
So connect that a little bit to the book, because I think that there's a deep through line here where you're arguing that it's not just legislators who need to fight more. It's that they need to think bigger. They need to take bigger steps to fix all of the broken stuff around us. And all the time what we see, and we get these emails from staffers on the Hill saying, my boss is introducing this new piecemeal legislation that would tweak one provision of this obscure code that would make 10 people's lives marginally better. Would you like to write about it? Are those the legislators who should be primaried? I mean, is one of the things you're looking for here the kind of big vision that it takes to come in and say, let's wipe this statute off the books and start over?
Yes, and to understand which politicians are already on your side. I write a lot. I have a whole chapter on the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1921, and we can talk about it later. But my issue is that one particular provision in that law, the illegal reentry law, should be repealed. Just straight up repealed, right? And I got that idea from Ayanna Pressley, Congresswoman from Boston, who has a bill on the floor to repeal. She has a bunch of reforms. She has a bunch of big ideas. But on this particular law, she's like, no, just repeal it. That's crazy. That just has to get out of the system, right? So there are politicians who are doing this, but part of the point of writing the book is to get people to know that, to get people to know what we should be asking, what we should be yelling at, and what we should be demanding of our politicians in these primaries. You know, you end up, look, you go to a town hall, they might answer one of your questions. They ain't answering mine. I'm getting screened out of the index cards, right? But if you're asking a question, you're just like, oh, Chuck Schumer, what do you think about the Protect Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, right? He'll be like, what, huh? I was told there would be no math, right? Is how he's going to respond. But like you get people actually talking about an actual law that gives gun manufacturers a liability shield that nobody else has in this country, and you ask them why you voted for it, like you did, Chuck Schumer, back in 2003 when you were a congressman. You ask him that, he's gonna have to find an answer. Right, and he's not going to be able to just say, "Oh, well, we got to do something about the guns on the street, crime, boy, I don't know." Right? That's the point of the part of the book is trying to give people the knowledge to hold their politicians, hold their leaders to account, not just on personality issues, not just on would I like to have a beer with them issues, but on actual policy that they can change.
Well, and they get away with not changing it, or even pretending like they didn't vote for it in the case of Chuck Schumer by saying, oh, it's complicated, right? By saying, oh, there's a lot going on with this statute. You really probably need a JD to understand it. The way it's been interpreted through tort liability and through the federal courts, blah 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 blah. And my sense is that one of your goals for this book is to really puncture that veil that is thrown up around bad laws that sort of tells people you don't get to critique this because you're not a lawyer. This strikes me as a book for both lawyers and non-lawyers, but especially for people who want the knowledge, the ability, the fluency to say this law is terrible, even if they didn't suffer through 3 years of law school like we did.
If they were smart enough not to go to law school, right? You were talking about the point of the book. That's also like the point of my career. Right? That's one of the reasons I feel like I've been put on this earth, is to de-jargonize the law, right? The law is complicated. I can't make it not complicated, and I'm not going to do a disservice to my readers by dumbing it down. It's a complicated field, but it's within the reach of most people. If you explain it well, most literate, intelligent people can grasp it, right? Like, I am not an evolutionist. I'm not a biologist. I understand Darwin. I get it. Apes, and then, Trumps, and then humans. Like, I get, how it works, right? People can get this stuff. And the book, my entire career, I try to write in a way that people can access the knowledge that is right there in front of them without hiding it behind jargon and terms and whatever that most people don't understand, right? That's why, fourth wall breaking a bit, but that's why the dick jokes are in there, folks, right? It's not just because I'm obsessed, right? It's they're there because it becomes like a hook that people, oh, I understand what a penis is. All right, well, if I understand what a penis is, I can understand what the Armed Career Criminals Act is. All right, I got it.
Okay, no, this is a perfect segue. Now I want you to move from a penis to the Armed Career Criminals Act, because this was one of the laws when you told me about this book. I was so excited. The first thing I said, very selfishly, was, Elie, you have to write about ACCA. I am obsessed with it. The Supreme Court has constant cases about it. The vast majority of Americans have no idea what it is. I am so delighted that it is an entire chapter in your book. You are crazy for taking it on, but you make it work. So tell us, let's just dive in. Tell us about it and why it's gotta go.
Most people, when I talk about the Armed Career Criminals Act, the easier way for me to talk about that is to talk about the 1994 crime bill. Most people have heard of the 1994 crime bill, the Bill Clinton, Joe Biden written, Hillary Clinton super predator, awful bill, right? But as I was talking to people like Mark, it's like, well, yes, you can start at 1994, but if you really want to get to the heart of the issue, the 1994 crime bill only built upon a structure that was laid down in 1984 in the Armed Career Criminals Act. The ACCA, or ACCA, what it did fundamentally is introduce the concept of mandatory minimums for violent crimes. It's the 3 strikes and you're out thing, right? So you commit a burglary, you carjacking, and then your third crime, no matter how low level it might be, if you get caught for that, you get a mandatory minimum of 15 years in prison. Honestly, if you're asking me from a first principles justice question, what's more just, mandatory minimums or trial by combat? And I will take trial by combat, because you might win. Right? You might actually win a fight. You're not going to win on a 15-year mandatory minimum sentence. Mandatory minimums end up punishing people for crimes they didn't commit because they committed previous crimes. Now, some people might be like, oh, well, that's not so bad. We should be putting the worst of the worst in jail for 15 years. That's certainly how the law was sold, but except we're not actually doing that. We're not actually putting the worst of the worst in jail. We're putting, in many cases, the unluckiest of the unlucky in jail for 15 years. One of the key scientific reasons for the 15 years was not a number they pulled out of the back of their ass. I know it sounds like it, right? But they had a reason for 15 years, right? Because the studies still back this up, most studies say that most people will commit most of their crimes, between the ages of 20 and 35. So the argument is that a 15-year mandatory minimum incapacitates the career criminal during their prime crime committing years. The thing is, we're not generally putting 20-year-olds in jail for 15 years because they haven't been convicted for their third crime by then, unless they're a really bad criminal. In which case, we really don't need to be worried about them as much, right? By the time you get popped for your third strike, you're usually in your 30s. You're about to age out of doing crimes and age into sitting on your stoop, talk about, my day, kids knew how to jack a car. Nobody knows how to jack a car no more. My day, we could jack one, right? That's the guy you're putting in jail for 15 years. You're putting a 30-year-old in jail till they're 45, when they're statistically, scientifically speaking, unlikely to be committing additional offenses. Right, so that's just one aspect of this massive injustice in this law. Another one is another huge issue is how they determine what counts as a violent crime or not. Because when it passed, initially, violent crimes were thought to be, again, the big ones: murder, rape, arson, the biggies, right? But by 1986, they passed something called the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. And the Anti-Drug Abuse Act retroactively updated the ACCA to include drug offenses as one of your strikes. So now, to be an armed career criminal for a mandatory minimum of 15 years, you have to sell some drugs when you shouldn't have been, sell some drugs again when you shouldn't have been, and then stolen a car. And then when you steal the car, if you happen to have a gun, didn't even have to use the gun in the commission of the crime. Car could have been parked unoccupied. You don't have to jack the car, you just have to boost it. But if you had a gun while you were boosting it, 15 years. Goodbye. It's unjust. It's simply unjust, and it's one of the most consistently unjust things we do. It is the thing that causes the mass incarceration problem in this country. As many people know, we incarcerate a higher percentage of our citizens than any other country in the world, and it's because of this law and the amendments to it. One of the amendments to the ACCA included the 1994 crime bill.
And now we have this population of geriatric inmates, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, because of the total irrationality of this law. Last time I checked, I don't even see a bill proposed to repeal ACCA. This is not on people's radars.
Democrats are nowhere on criminal justice reform. They are nowhere. They had that brief moment when, like, a bunch of white people were like, oh man, what happened to George Floyd was super bad. We should do something. And then they forgot about it. Right?
Yeah.
And then they literally passed the First Steps Act, right? And I always love, like, you know your law is bad when you're calling it, dude, it's just the first step. It's just baby steps, right? And that was it. Like the momentum for criminal justice reform is so stalled that right now Democrats are basically trying to prove that they can be just as evil towards criminals as Republicans. Like, that's what they're actually trying to do. I like to make the argument in the immigration field that the difference between the Democratic strategy on immigration and the Republican strategy on immigration is that Republicans will call you names while they do it. But other than that, it's the same strategy, right? The Democrats want to orderly and efficiently deport the worst criminals back to their home countries. And Republicans want to orderly and criminally and deport the worst criminals back to their home countries while calling them racial slurs on the way out. That's the fundamental difference, right? Democrats are always trying to look tough on crime as opposed to trying to look rational on crime. And it's one of the things that completely warps our criminal justice system.
Okay, so you've brought this up now twice. We have to go to it. Tell us about the reentry provision of immigration law. There's so much wrong with immigration law. You could have written 10 books about it, right? But you zeroed in on this one provision that I think, probably a lot of people don't know about, that works so much mischief in the system.
So I literally had to come to this city. I live in New York. I had to come to this city. I had to go to the Library of Congress, and I had to spend a day reading the congressional record for a particular man named Dr. Henry Laughlin. He was a famous American eugenicist, and his science was heavily relied on by Congress in the passage of the 1921 Immigration Nationality Act. They brought him in for congressional testimony. Many of the people who wrote the law said that his science was vital to the passage of the law and the importance of why the law needs to be. And one of the things that Laughlin said is that the mongrelization of the white race had to be stopped from the inferior races. That was his things. Laughlin was such a good eugenicist that they took him, that he emigrated to Nazi Germany and ended up being the Nazis' head eugenicist, getting a medal from the University of Heidelberg in 1930. Do you know how much of an asshole you gotta be to get a medal from the University of Heidelberg in 1938? Like, you gotta be a world historic. We exported Nazi eugenics to the Nazis in the figure of this man who also happened to be the key scientist on our current immigration law. Because the law, the language that I'm using, illegal reentry, is what criminalizes an immigration offense, right? Illegal entry, that's a civil offense. You get deported or pay a fine or whatever. You don't go to jail behind illegal entry, but illegal reentry, so you've been in the country, been kicked out, and you come back, that's when it becomes a crime. That's when we put you in jail. That's when we rip you away from your family. That's when the cruelty starts. And that idea, that language has remained unchanged from 1921 to the current day, and is what's currently being used to hold people like Mahmoud Khalil and Resmaz Ozturk in jail right now.
And as you write, a federal judge actually acknowledged that and attempted to strike down this law.
There was a huge case called Carrillo Lopez that went to the district court in Nevada, where the district judge was like, yeah, this law looks pretty racist. We should get rid of that. And they appealed it. So they won at district court, but they appealed to the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit, no, we're not talking about the Fifth Circuit here. We're not talking about like a crazy conservative circuit. We're talking about
real court.
The generally like rational Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit is basically like, yeah, but if we just went through getting rid of every law just because they were racist, I mean, it would like completely overturn the system, right? To which, of course, lawyers were like, yes, that it would. That's kind of the point. But the judges were just like, no, we can't. You can't. They basically said you can't go back and say that a law is unconstitutionally being applied just because it was written to be unconstitutionally racist, right? To which I'm always like, that is the whitest ass shit that I've ever heard, right? That's just such a white answer, right? Like, what do you mean you can't? But they did it. They literally, it's a Nazi. They don't care. They don't care. Right? So this particular provision causes so much needless harm. And I gave you the easy example. I gave you the Republican example of the immigrant who comes, gets denied, and comes back. That's all Republicans want you to think of. This person came, they got told no once, and they came again, gosh darn it, jail. Right? Now, even that I think is stupid. But that's not actually the classic illegal reentry case. Because illegal reentry attaches when you are found in the United States after overstaying a visa. Illegal reentry attaches when you come seasonally for work again and again and again and again and again. And the first 5 times you came, you had valid papers. But the 6th time, because some gringo changed the law while you were in Mexico not paying attention, when you come the 6th time, all of a sudden your visa is you are coming again, having been previously denied entry, and all of a sudden you're a criminal. When they say that most of these immigrants commit crimes, the crime that they're talking about is illegal reentry. So the level of needless cruelty for this law, to me, is honestly off the charts. And I say that as a person, I'm not even trying to convince people about my actual immigration policies, right? I'm basically open borders. We got enough space. I've been to Montana. There's enough space. Like we're fine. I think everybody should be able to come, and I don't think they should even have to ask very hard, like whatever. Because honestly, sorry, now I'm here. We suck up the world's money. Doesn't it make sense that the world would like come here to like get some back, right? And I don't know. I live in New York. I got married by the Statue of Liberty, and I read the plaque, and it doesn't say, "Give me your tired, your poor, who can get into Harvard or work for Google." It's not what it says. Right? So I have really progressive views on immigration, but I don't need people to agree with me on that. I literally do not need people to agree with my broader progressive views on immigration. I just got to get people to agree with me that maybe using the criminal statute written by the Nazi eugenicists is not the very best we can do in the land of the free and the home of the brave.
So I feel like I have so much power here, and that I can just pitch one of these laws to you and have you go for brilliant minutes uninterrupted. We are soon going to turn to Q&A, and for those who are interested, you can start lining up at the microphone right here. And please be sure to speak into the microphone, and please be sure to formulate your thought as a question. That means it has a question mark at the end of it. Just a reminder. But I do have one more that I have to ask before we turn to the audience, because I think you've hit on a theme that runs through your book, which is the way that the law artificially decides who is a criminal, who is an incorrigible criminal who has to be locked away forever, and who is, in fact, a perfectly innocent person. Usually it's black people who are criminals and white people who are innocent people. Yeah, precisely. But one of the other laws that you use to illustrate this is stand your ground laws. But you don't just land on stand your ground laws. You go back to castle doctrine, which I think is so important and so rarely done. So can you just talk to us, not briefly, but in a fairly speedy way, because I know folks have lots of questions. Like, why is it that in half of the states in this country you can basically shoot someone and get away with it?
Right. So thank you so much for that question. I love talking about castle doctrine. I'll kind of start at the end. The reason why I'm talking about castle doctrine is because all stand your ground does is extend castle doctrine to anywhere else that you legally are, right? So the basic castle doctrine thing is that if somebody enters your house, you have the right to shoot them, right? Which is dumb. In every other situation, the way that we do is that you have a right to use deadly force against a person if they are threatening you with deadly force. But if you have the opportunity, if you're not being threatened with deadly force, you can't use deadly force. If you have the opportunity to get away from a person who's trying to use deadly force against you, you should get away, right? If somebody pulls a gun on me and it's just like, give me your wallet, and I'm like, no, and they're like, damn. Like, then I win, then I can just walk away, right? I'm like, well, technically you pulled the gun, so, sir, right now you have to execute. Like, no, that's not how it works, right? Castle doctrine interrupts that normal question into self-defense by saying if a person is entering your home, you can basically assume that deadly force is being used against you and shoot them to death. Now, look, I have a wife, I have children. Home invasion is among the worst things that I can think of, right? I'm not armed because I have small children, and that would be stupid. But I got, I'm the T3000, right? I got blunt force and stabbing weapons all throughout my damn house, right? Like I got Thor's hammer. I got, my wife's not. I will stab a person, right? Nobody is getting prosecuted for killing a person who has gotten all the way into their bedroom to threaten the family. That does not happen. That is a lie that has ever happened. If you kill somebody who has made it all the way into your bedroom, the only time you're going to get charged is when the person you killed just happened to be having sex with your spouse. Officer, I was attacked in my own bedroom by this person who was also attacking my wife, kind of wrestling with her in some way. Who could know? That's when you get charged. Right? An actual home invasion situation and you defend yourself, you're not going to get charged. Castle doctrine is most often used not in the situation where somebody's made it all the way to the bedroom, because people don't. It's used when you just see a black person on your property and you start taking pot shots. That's what castle doctrine's for. I saw somebody on my property, not in my house. Nobody gets charged when they make it all the way into your house. I saw somebody on my property and I happened to have a gun, so I shot them to death. That's what happens. And stand your ground, which is the most provably racist law we have in this country by stats. If you are white and you shoot a black person under stand your ground, you are something like 218% more likely to get off than if you are black and shoot a white person under stand your ground. So it's not a law that black people can use, but it's a law that white people can use against us all the time. One of the most provably racist laws in the country. All stand your ground is to extend castle doctrine outside your house. So if you are where you are, and somebody pisses you off, cuts you off, bothers you, and you shoot them, and you say, I was standing my ground, if you're white, 218% more likely to get off if that victim was black.
All right. I could continue, and these injustices are so outrageous, and I encourage everyone to read about them in the book and arm yourself figuratively. With the ability to fight against them.
Right.
But I know people have questions, so let's begin, please.
Thanks very much. I happen to be a scholar of Latin American dictatorships, Chile and Argentina and Brazil. And
Very relevant today.
well, I give that context only because when I saw the video of Ramesa Osterk being taken, I was struck not only by the procedural irregularities, but in the fact that she was taken by masked people into an unmarked car, stripped of her phone, and or something else that made it sort of like the disappearances. And I wonder, how do we convey to people who maybe aren't historians by trade how serious this is? That this is not about debating whether we're in a constitutional crisis or not. This is like we're a country that allows disappearances now. And
Yeah, and you're talking about people. I'm just kind of stuck on how do you convey to the media to understand how important and dangerous this moment is, right? Because I feel like when people see it, people get it, but it's the media that tries to whitewash and sanewash what's happening. I've been saying we live in a fascist dictatorship now. This is what it feels like now. It's not coming around the corner. We're not descending into, it's here. Because when a person can be pulled off the street without due process, what's to stop them from doing it to you, right? They say, oh, well, she was just a green card holder. She wasn't a legal citizen. How do you know? Because you read it on the news? She's actually never been in court to even have that adjudicated. So if they can do it to her, they can do it to literally anybody. They can literally take away your due process rights to anybody. And when people see it happen on video, they get it, but the news media is not designed to call a spade a spade. They're not designed to call Trump a racist. They are afraid of him. The news media is more afraid of him than anybody. Well, I was going to say anybody. I know what's happening with law firms now, too, and there's some sniveling cowards. But the news media is generally more afraid of Trump than anybody, right? They are not. Trump is not taking their First Amendment rights. They are giving it to him. And that is part of my crusade, basically. Whenever I'm in a room with media people, this is what I'm talking about. You have the power to shape the narrative around this. And one of the people are just like, oh, there are some people who are just like, oh, you scream all the time, you seem so angry, you would be much more persuasive and effective if you were calm. And I'm like, why the hell would I be calm right now?
I loathe asking questions. I'm just a simple woman who reads. You used a word, willing to put your body on the line. I want to know why you don't just go on and say the R word. There's a book I read when I was a kid by Angela Davis, If They Come For Me in the Morning. That's what you're describing. If they come for the immigrants, the people with green cards in the morning, who's to say they're not coming after us in the afternoon, in the evening? And real quickly, can I disagree with the questioner who said geriatric prisoners, and he started with the age 55? But you're not using the R word. You're not using the R word.
You're talking about revolution?
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I also don't want to get shot. But no, I don't. I guess I'm not using it because we're not there yet. I think we're. I don't think that I got the wind at my back and the people on my side for revolution when I'm still trying to get people to call the problem correctly, right? I feel like we're still on the stage of I don't want to go back to, I'm a Gen Xer, so I don't want to go back so far into my childhood, but it's that G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. I'm still trying to get people to call the problem correctly before I can even work on what the solution to that problem is. Because my guess, my hope, is that if I can get people to see the problem correctly, I don't have to tell them what to do about it. People have long known what to do about it when they see it, but you have to get them to see it first. And I'm still in the kind of could we see what's happening on stage? But I'll get there. I mean, again, I would rather get there from Jamaica. I'd rather not get there from, from an undefensible apartment in the suburbs. But I'll get there.
I do just want to note I was attempting to do air quotes when I said geriatric prisoners. That is how they're classified by the Bureau of Prisons. It was not my own terminology. But next question, thank you.
I enjoy watching you on Roland Martin and on The Breakfast Club this morning. I've been to quite a few events over the years here, and looking at the crowd here, usually when there are African-American authors, usually the crowd is typically 90-something% only African-Americans. What do you think it is about your draw that draws such an ethnically diverse crowd?
Literally never gotten that question from that side before. I love that question. I'm going to have to think about the answer to that question. Why don't white people hate me as much as one might think? is how I'm going to rephrase that. I think there are two things. Culturally speaking, as I said, I'm a Gen X person, and I talk in a very kind of white-coded Gen X way, right? Like my reference base is more Beetlejuice than I'm gonna get you sucker, right? Like I can code switch to both, but like I can code switch to both, and I often do. So I think that white people of my generation recognize me. We hung out together. We went to the same shows. We went to Lollapalooza together. Like, you know, so I've got that cultural, so I think while a lot of Black people are always worried about culturally connecting with their community, with our community, I kind of assume that I can connect with our community. And if I'm going to code switch, I'm spending most of my time code switching into the white community as well to like kind of bring more people in. I'm a very kind of, like my favorite character, my favorite fictional character is Kermit the Frog, right? And what does he say? We need more dogs and cats and bears and chickens and things. Like I'm very kind of inclusive on that way, right? So I think that's number one. I think the other reason for it, though, is that, like, and I've said this in a lot of different ways, but, like, my job is not to persuade white folks. I was not put on this earth to make white people feel better about themselves, because the white people who are already doing the good things don't need my permission, and they don't need my blessing. And I think a lot of the white people who come to a book event like this, they're not coming for my blessing, right? They already are, they're trying to pull the rope in the same way that I'm trying to pull the rope, and they're interested in how I might want to pull the rope maybe a little bit differently or whatever than they have heard before, but they just want to pull the rope, right? And so I think that a lot of people don't talk to those people as if they're regular, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't talk to white people who always agree with me, like, Mark, like, you're such a good white man. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your allyship. Like, I don't talk to them like that. I talk to them like, all right, I got you. So we're cool. Now let's figure out who else we can go get, right? And I think a lot of people appreciate being treated like that, you know, as opposed to making them feel like that's othering. Does that make sense? But I'm going to think about it more. That's a really interesting question.
I have like a really boring question. So when it comes to getting rid of the laws, would you prefer that they be gotten rid of through the judicial process or the legislative process, or does it not matter? And if so, like why or why not?
So I have become a recent convert against judicial supremacy. You know, when I was in law school, I was very into judicial supremacy because I was in law school and I thought that's how the world should work. And I also think that I took the lesson from the civil rights movement that a lot of Black lawyers take, that I think was the wrong lesson, was that, like, well, we never would have had civil rights without the Supreme Court. That we needed Earl Warren, we needed Brown v. Board of Ed to get our rights. We wouldn't, because Alabama was never going to give us rights. It was later in life that I realized, wait a minute, Alabama was never going to give us rights. They never did. They didn't care. What integrated the schools in the South was not a Supreme Court ruling. It was JFK and LBJ putting boots on the ground. That's what gave us the rights. It wasn't some like hoity-toity Supreme Court ruling on paper. So that was part of my like evolution to realizing that the courts have value. Obviously, I cover it for a living. I think the courts are extremely important, but that's not where movements start, right? And real change comes from the ground up. It does not come from the top down, from the Supreme Court. So to answer your question, I would much prefer the laws to be overturned legislatively than by fiat by 9 unelected, unaccountable judges. If anything, I've been telling Democrats, this is a great moment to be pushing a lack of judicial supremacy. Right now, Democrats, because they perceive that the courts are the only things that are going to stop Trump, they're running into the courts and into the power of the courts. I saw a Democrat, I believe he was from my state, oh yes, he was Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, say, well, when Trump defies a Supreme Court order, then things will get serious. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Things are A, already serious. B, you're telling me that the 6-3 conservative supermajority on the Supreme Court gets to decide for you, Chuck, when things are serious? Nah, get out of my face with that. John Roberts is not your friend. He wasn't your friend yesterday. He wasn't your friend 5 years ago. He's not your friend today, and he won't be your friend tomorrow. So no, I would rather not do it through the courts. I would rather do it through the people. God, I hate Roberts. Mark wrote a whole book on Roberts and how terrible he is.
Yeah, but you know, he's Gen X like you, Elie. Your generation has to answer for these guys.
Oh my God, my generation is such a failure.
I'm a huge fan of you both, so it's a delight to see you. The idea of 10 bad laws, 10's a good number, and I guess I was just wondering if there was an 11 that you had to cut. Like, what would be 11?
Yeah, so in the publishing, we call it a listicle, and it tends to drive clicks. Round numbers were better. Obviously, I do write an 11th chapter. It's about the Second Amendment and how basically in my first book, I argued that the Second Amendment was being poorly interpreted. And in this book, I was like, but if you think I'm wrong, and you think the Second Amendment is being correctly interpreted, then goddamn, we must repeal it. Because apparently you think that there's a murder-suicide pact in the Constitution, and we should do something about that. So kind of a fuller discussion on the Second Amendment is probably the thing that was most obviously left on the cutting board floor. I was looking a lot at housing laws, and I couldn't find the best example of it, right? The Fair Housing Act did a lot to overturn or to make unconstitutional some of our housing discrimination, but we still have a lot of housing discrimination in this country, but it's so local. Like, I do some local laws. I mean, stand your ground is fundamentally a state law. But housing discrimination, the way it works right now, is very local, very like zoning board here and bank loan procedures there. And so I couldn't kind of like, what was on the cutting room floor was that I couldn't kind of coalesce it all into like the one thing that's still causing housing discrimination in the country. You kind of need to write a whole different book on housing discrimination.
But you do talk about redlining and your own experience with housing discrimination at the outset.
Oh yeah, I talk in the book about how the first house that I tried to buy in Westchester, everything was going fine and we had signed everything, and then we went for the inspection and they realized they were selling to a black family, and then 2 days later they took the house off the market. They said they didn't want to sell the house anymore, and I was so hurt. I loved that house. I thought I had one kid there. We were moving out of the city so we could have a second kid. I'm like, we're going to be in this for 30 years and you're not going to sell it to me? It hurt my feelings. And my wife was like, my wife also went to Harvard, so she's like, we should sue. But then the other part of me kicked in. I was like, I am not giving those white folks my money. If it's the last thing I do, they can choke on it for all I fucking care. There was day one hurt, day two super pissed. I was like, I will find another house and I will walk past that. I'll piss on their house every day. Do it. I'm still not over it. But I don't, they eventually sold it to a different white family, and they don't know who I am. The family that bought the house that I wanted to buy does not know who I am and does not know why that house was available for them. Because what am I going to do? You have my house, and they're going to be like, from Kansas,
I kind of feel like they owe you reparations.
But it's one of those things. But it is one of those things of people white folks especially don't always get their privilege, right? There's a white family that does not think that white privilege got them their house, and I know for a fact that it did, right? And they probably don't spend a lot of time wrestling with that. Whereas me, I gotta walk past their funky house every day on the way to the train because the house that I did find was further away from the train than theirs, and so I have to walk past it every day, and it sucks. But we overcome. My house is very nice now. I mean, it's not, but
I'm very grateful that your books have kind of thrown a bomb in the publishing world on law and statutes, which tend to be very dry. And I think your message comes across very strongly, and I would hope people in Congress are reading it, maybe calling you about it. But beyond that, people of our age are kind of built in our views and our prejudices as much as we try to learn. And it seems to me children, high school, elementary, need to understand in learning about the Constitution and laws the bad side of them, that it's not the frilly pink balloons out there that it's always presented as. And would your books be banned as DEI content?
Sure.
Now?
Yes.
Yes. This book is going to be banned in Florida by the time this event is over. I guarantee you.
Look, both of my books are very I don't use the term because it's not a term that means anything to non-academics, but both of my books are critical race theory books, straight up. Right? That's not, I'm not hiding the ball on that at all. Of course my books will be banned in certain places. The first one has been banned in certain places. This one, I'm sure, will be too. I'm not concerned about the bannings because, you know, if you tell a kid, like, you can't read this, that's going to make a certain kind of kid, and almost especially the kind of kid that I'm trying to reach, that's going to make them want to read it more, right? I got that bad law. I got that bad law, yo. Come get I got 2 pages of the bad law, right? That's how it's gonna, like, that'll work for me. I'm down for it. So I'm not worried about that. What I will say though is that I think the kids are okay. Like I have a lot of hope in the younger generation in terms of what they're doing. As I said before you came up to the mic, look, I'm Gen X. Our generation has failed. Like our generation is a generation of failure. We had the opportunity to push the rock and we failed. And now we have to accept that we failed and understand that we will not be the leaders of our redemption. The millennials and the Gen Zs, our children will be the leaders of our redemption, and all we should be doing is help. Right? So sometimes when I'm in those rooms, in those geriatric rooms, not geriatric in the way you're talking about, actual geriatric rooms, right? I'm telling people, like, get out of the way. You know, I'm a dad. I go to the game. I'm bringing orange slices. My job isn't to play in the game, right? The kid has to win the game. I'm taking them out for pizza, right? And generally, as I look at, you know, some of the young movements, I'm like, what do I have to offer these people? I've got wisdom and knowledge, what they can ask me about if they want to. But I can't lead what they're doing, right? I've got things like a mortgage, which is not a word they can even spell, right? So I can give them some money. I have disposable income, which is not a thing that they have. I can use some of my disposable income to give them money and help their movements. When I was at the DNC, you know, there's Radio Row, or, you know, you go, there's a section in the convention hall, and it's just like, WABC, WQPR, right? And it's just blah, 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 and you kind of go through and you do all of them like a car wash. And I have nothing against doing local radio, you know, whatever. But I was like, where are the TikTokers? And they were like, huh? I was like, how come there's not at least a booth that TikTok, there wasn't, right? Well, we kind of put them in, they told me they put them kind of in the back and whatever. I went and found them. And I was like, hey, I'm a person at the DNC. I'll be happy to do your show, right? Because, like, for them, and, you know, look, I'm old, so I'm, you know, I got people, I'm like, Tristan, are you a Nazi? Is Tristan a Nazi? Like, before I go on the shows, because I don't know. But, like, for a lot of them, like, I was one of the better guests that they could get, which is ridiculous because I was a Democratic goddamn national convention, and they should have been able to get congressmen. They should have been able to get senators. They should have been able to get high-level staffers. They couldn't. They could get me. But, like, I made sure that they could get me. Because not only do I have a message that I want their audience to hear, but it's also like that's going to make them look better, look more serious, be taken more seriously by their peers. They're going to be okay if we help them. But if we try to control it, if we try to run it for them, if we try to say, now, young buck, the way that we used to do it, why would they listen to me? We lost, right? The way that I did it, well, you failed, old man. So maybe you don't actually know exactly how to marshal TikTok in the 2028 presidential election, right? And I'm like, you're orange slice.
I would love to get in one more. All right, one more. Sorry. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your first book, and I'm super excited to read your second. One of the things that I was curious about, you talked about how, sorry about that, you talked about how the Democratic Party hasn't done enough in terms of criminal justice. I think both parties haven't done enough in terms of education. And I'm super excited to potentially teach this to my seniors, and I'm curious, and full disclosure, I work in independent school, I've worked in public schools, I'm a product of independent schools, I'm in grad school right now, so education is my bag. I love it. It's really important to me. It should be important for the world. What would you say to the Gen Z that is really passionate but doesn't necessarily know, especially if I go to independent school, like how gutting of America's public school destroys everybody's educational opportunities, how it destroys our future teachers, our future doctors, lawyers, so on and so forth. So, you know, the 12th law, if you were to say, for my students, what would you say in terms of how do we give them an on-ramp to understand what needs to be done or what could be done nationally to improve our education?
So I would kind of come at it from a slightly different angle. I never try to tell people, here's what you should think is important. I try to, especially young people, right? Because they'll shank you. I try to ask them what they think is important, And then I try to say, okay, this thing that you think is important, let me link it up to whatever it is, whatever important thing I think of, right? I used to do this almost parlor trick where I was like, you know, person under 30, tell me the issue that you care about. I will tell you the Supreme Court's case that fucked you, right? And just like, I could do it all night.
Love that.
So it's kind of using what they care about and then tying it to what I care about as opposed to top down. So for education, a lot of times you'll get kids saying like, well, why doesn't everybody know this? You know, like, or they'll say something that they saw on YouTube and you'll say like, actually that's wrong. It's not, you know, like, well, I mean, it's wrong. Well, how come people don't know? Well, and that's when you talk about how they've hollowed out public education. With my kids, a lot of times they will find things that are on YouTube that are right. And I'll be like, oh, that's actually correct. That's interesting. But how did that person figure it out? Like, because again, YouTube never gets its sources. So especially with my now 12-year-old, I'm always kind of like, great, you saw it on YouTube. Awesome. That was actually the right conclusion. But now let's go deeper. Let's look at where did the YouTuber make his conclusions from? Like, where did he get his sources? Because, you know, I keep sending my kid, who, you know, he's a 12. He thinks he is going to be a YouTuber because that's like a job now, apparently. If you're going to make your own videos, you're going to have to do your own research. You can't just do reacts videos, son, right? You got to do original content. Where are you going to get the original content? It's going to be from this book. It's going to be from this research. It's going to be from, right? And so I find that at least for the kids that I have and the kids that I talk to, tends to make it link up harder for them. But in general, you always have to start with what they care about and graft your issues onto them as opposed to the other way around.
Give it up one more time for Elie.
Thank you so much for coming.
So whether or not Elie's book gets banned, it did make the latest New York Times bestseller list this week. So there's hope. His message is obviously